Is it ever gonna feel normal talking to a camera? I don't think so. Hello and welcome back to my channel, everybody. My name is Rayleigh Bradshaw. I am an aspiring author of YA historical fiction, and I'm bringing you a video that's a little bit different today than my norm. Do I even have a norm? Probably not. I just started my channel. I feel like not only as writers, but also as author tubers or people just trying to put our craft out there for others to appreciate, I feel like that imposter syndrome is just bound to sneak in at some point, and I've been feeling a little bit of that lately. And I have always been one to just own up to, well, I haven't always been, but I usually try to be somebody who just owns up to my insecurities. Today I'm bringing you a video of 5 things I'm embarrassed to admit about my writing. Things that kind of make me feel like I'm an imposter in this writing world. Things that make me feel like, do I really belong here? Things that make me wonder, if people knew this about me, would they stop watching my channel? Would they not want to read my books? Rather than tremble alone about these things, I'm just gonna share them with you, put them out in the open so you guys know. So if knowing these things makes you not want to watch my channel anymore, or makes you decide you don't want to read my book someday in the future, let's just get it all out there right now. Why wait until later? The first thing that I'm embarrassed to admit is that I never learned how to type correctly. I know a lot of people in school took typing classes where you had your finger on the F and the J, or J and the F, whatever, and you actually learned how to type correctly. I never learned that in school. I went to this tiny little private school / homeschool co-op kind of thing, and we just never had a typing class. We didn't really use computers that much. We wrote everything by hand and then would go home and, type it out on the computer for final drafts and stuff like that. So I just never learned how to type. And I remember one time, maybe I was 14 or 15 or something, and somebody had mentioned that I type funny. They said, "What, you only type with one hand?" And I was like, I guess so, I don't know. And I was writing a lot by that point. I was posting stories onto the internet, and I would spend hours and hours and hours every day just in my own little world writing books. I think I was role-playing by that point, like not video game role-playing, but book role-playing, like where there were several of us writing a book together almost, but we all controlled different characters. Oh, it was so fun and super addicting, and I would be up all night doing it. Point is, I was typing a lot, but I wasn't doing it correctly, and someone pointed it out to me, kind of teased me about it. So I thought, oh, I guess, should I learn how to do it correctly? And they said, oh, it would be so helpful to you because you'd be able to type so much faster if you did it the right way. And I was like, oh, I didn't feel like I was a slow typer, but okay. I found this old, textbook from the 80s that we had sitting around our house for some reason, and I tried to use it, and it was so boring. I hated it so much that I just didn't do it. Flash forward to the present, and I wish that I had stuck with it and just learned how to do it the right way. It never really bothered me that I type incorrectly. I type mostly with my right hand, and then I use my left hand just for the caps lock or shift and then the space bar. But I never think about it. I just type. In my mind, I always thought I typed quickly that way. But then during camp, NaNoWriMo, just this last month, I was watching, I recorded so many clips of myself typing, and I was just able to see that, wow, it looks so odd. Because most people, when they type, their hands are like this, and apparently that's better for your wrists. When I type, my wrists are completely turned out like this, and I hold the ends of my laptop with my pinkies. I didn't ever know that I did that until I watched myself on video doing that. So I hold the ends of my of my keyboard with my pinkies like this, and then I'm using this hand to type like this, and then just a couple of fingers here. Oh my gosh, it looks so weird. If you've never noticed that, I'd be surprised, but you can go and look at any of my Camp NaNoWriMo vlogs and you will see that my hands look really weird when I'm typing. My husband had pointed it out to me several times. Every time he watches me type, he's like, oh my gosh, that looks so inefficient and so bad for your wrists, because my wrists are constantly going like this. I never cared. I was like, yeah, whatever, this is how I do it. It doesn't hurt my wrists or anything. But then during camp, I brought that up to him again, like, you're right, I do type really weird, and it kind of does look like it's bad for my wrists, like it's gonna hurt me in later years or something. And I actually do have wrist problems, but I always thought it was from something else. And so we decided to see, like, do I really type as fast as I think I do? So we both took this typing timed test, and he was like 3 times faster than I was. And I was actually surprised at how slow I was, and by doing that timed test, I realized one of the reasons I'm so slow is because I'm constantly pressing the wrong keys, or I really rely on I have to look at the keyboard to type. It just slows me down, and since I'm constantly pressing the wrong keys and having to backspace and, you know, erase and start all over again, it just takes up so much time, and by then I lose my train of thought and I end up sitting there for a long time trying to get my train of thought back. Whereas if I was typing correctly and just knew where the keys were on the keyboard, I would probably be able to type along with my train of thought. So I'm embarrassed to admit that because it seems like everybody else on YouTube types correctly. Whenever I watch their hands, I'm like, wow, it looks so beautiful. It's like synchronized swimming with your fingers. Oh my gosh, what a weirdo. But anyways, and so I decided I'm just going to learn how to type the correct way. And so I know it's going to slow me down in the beginning as I'm learning to break my ways and start from scratch. I spent almost 45 minutes the other day doing this online course, which was way more fun than that dusty old textbook from the 80s. They had all these games and everything, and it was actually really fun, and I was picking up on it a little bit faster than I thought I would. So I have high hopes that one day I will actually be able to type correctly and be fast at it. So that's something I'm working on, and something that I'm embarrassed to admit to the writing community at large. Number 2, the second thing that I am embarrassed to admit to all of you bookish people out there is that I hardly ever read. Everybody says to be a good writer, you need to read a lot. And I used to be a huge bookworm. I used to constantly have a book on me and just be reading. I could read all day long, but I don't know if college ruined that for me or what it was. But in recent years, I've had a really hard time just sitting down and actually reading a book and finishing it. And I don't know if it's because as I've been trying to improve my writing craft, I've just become so much more critical of books that I read that it makes it harder to get through them because I'm constantly picking them apart, which is terrible, and I don't want to do that. I feel like I'm getting a little bit better about just enjoying the book. And I made a goal this year to read 100 books. And I counted audiobooks as reading for this because I have a lot of time at work that I can listen to audiobooks. So I've read about 56. I think I'm at 56 books this year that I have read, but I've only actually read, like in book form on the page, 2 or 3 of those books. Maybe 4, I don't know. But the rest have all been audiobooks that I just crank through while I'm at work. I mean, I love audiobooks. I love them. I think they're amazing. But I do feel like there's definitely a difference between actually sitting down and reading a book and listening to an audiobook. And I found that there are some books that are just better when you actually sit down and read the physical book as opposed to listening to someone else read it to you. Because when you read an audiobook, there's this added element of now someone's reading it to you and they're putting their own voice and their own interpretation on the text. Whereas when you're reading it yourself, you can imagine it however you want. So I found that with audiobooks, I prefer to read things like autobiographies or nonfiction in audiobook form. And then with fiction, I prefer to read it in the book form. It is harder to find time to sit down and read an entire book, but it's something that I want to get better about. So yeah, so I'm embarrassed to admit that. It feels like whenever I go on YouTube and watch other author tubers, they're constantly talking about all these books that they've read and that they love, and maybe, who knows, maybe they're all just listening to audiobooks too, but in my mind I always imagine like, oh, they're real bookish people and they're reading all these books. How do they find time for that? I know a lot of you actually do, and I am in awe of you. I'm in awe of people who just crank their way through tons and tons of physical books. I would like to get better about that, but yes, that's something I'm embarrassed to admit. I do not read that much, and I wish that I read more. The third thing, is that a weird thing to say? The third thing that I am embarrassed to admit is that I have a very small vocabulary, and I'm sure this ties into not reading very much. This is another difference between listening to audiobooks. Sorry, my cat is just walking around. It's 5 in the morning, so that's why it's dark outside. Anyways, I feel like this is another thing that is a big difference between listening to audiobooks and actually reading. When you actually read, I feel like it increases your vocabulary, and I don't get that from audiobooks as much. I don't know if it has to do with your brain just remembers things better when you read them. I'm sure it has something to do with that. I'm sure when you actually read a word on the page, something in your brain writes it down in your brain and you can remember that word better and it increases your vocabulary. Whereas when you're just listening to audiobooks, it's kind of like watching movies or something. The word translates through your brain into the right emotion or the right idea, concept that you need to understand to follow the story, but you're not really thinking about the words as much and you don't see them in your mind written out because you can't see them written out, and how they're spelled and things like that. So I feel like by reading more physical books with my eyeballs, it would improve my vocabulary more. I just feel like I have a very limited vocabulary and it becomes more and more obvious as I'm writing, and I just sit there for such a long time thinking what's a word that means this? I don't think it helps that I'm bilingual, and a lot of the time I'll think of the perfect word, but it's in Portuguese and not in English. This doesn't happen that often, but sometimes it does, and then I'm like, do we have a word like that in English? And so it gets kind of confusing. Kitty, you are distracting me. I feel like my English has kind of gone downhill and I would like to improve it. I want to increase my vocabulary. I want to increase my vocabulary. Oh gosh, I was in the bookstore the other day with my husband, and we're walking around and there was this couple sitting on the floor and they were having this existential conversation and using big words like juxtaposition. I feel like every time someone uses the word juxtaposition in my mind, I'm like, they're an intellectual. They're just trying to be smart. Because I would never use that word in just day-to-day conversation, even though my husband uses that word. I don't know. It's just so funny, walking through a bookstore, the big words that people use, and I'm like, they're those people that read a lot. I don't read a lot. I just attempt to be an author, that's all. I just want people who read a lot to read my books. Oh my gosh. Wow, I am making myself sound pretty pathetic. Whatever, this is the point of this video, I guess. I'm embarrassed about these things, guys. Okay, moving on to the next one. As if I don't sound like enough of a poser already, here is thing number 4 that I am embarrassed to admit, is that I almost failed my creative writing class at college. No, that's not true. I didn't almost fail it. I passed it with I think I got a B+ maybe or something like that. But I went into that class with these totally different expectations of what it was going to be like, and thinking, oh, I am going to ace this class and knock the teacher's socks off. Everybody in class is going to be like, whoa, she's a real writer, because I've been writing since I was 8 years old and I spent hours every day writing, so I'm going to be so good at this. And then that wasn't the case at all. That was actually my least favorite class that I ever took in college, was my creative writing class. Which is hilarious because I love to write and I like to be creative. Writing has been a part of my identity since I was a small child of 8 years old. That's what I was growing up. I was the one who wrote. Among my friends, I used to write stories, and then my poor friends would have to sit through them while I read them out loud. Oh my gosh, these poor people. But I was always a writer growing up, and so then when I went into college, I was all excited to show off to my college professors that I had been working over my writing for all these years. So it's a well-honed craft, and you just wait until you can see what I can do. But then instead what happened was I realized, wow, I cannot write at all. I am super bad at this, and I don't really like what real writing is. I think a big part of why I didn't like my creative writing class was it felt like I didn't really like the writing style of my professor, and it kind of felt like she was trying to get everyone to write in the same way that she wrote. And she would read a lot of her stuff in class, and I remember just kind of rolling my eyes a little bit because I was like, I don't like this. If this was a book I picked up, I would put it down. Like, I wouldn't keep reading it. This is not the kind of writing that I like. This is not the kind of storytelling that I enjoy. So I wrote the kind of stuff that I enjoyed. Then when we would do critique groups, it seemed like every person in the classroom who wrote in the exact same style as the teacher, she would like rave about their writing. And then anyone who was different, like outside of that box, was needed to work on their writing more. And it was funny because I kind of liked the other people's writing better. And so it kind of made me think, maybe I just like bad writing more than I like good writing, or it threw me for a loop. But to be honest, there were other major things going on in my life at the time that I started college that were really intense and life-changing. I kind of try to take everything in my first semester of college with a grain of salt, all of my memories, and just be like, I'm sure a lot of these memories are tainted by what was going on in my personal life at the time that was really intense. So who knows, if I took another creative writing class, I have a feeling I would like it a lot more and I would just soak up everything that I could learn from it. But at that time, I was not soaking anything up. I was no sponge. I was a rock. And I was like, I do not want to write like this, and I like the way I write better. And I feel like I did learn a little bit, but not as much as I could have if I'd had a more open mind. My favorite classes in college were every communications class I've ever taken, and I really liked my college writing class. I just didn't like creative writing. Isn't that weird? And that's an embarrassing thing for me to admit to a lot of creative writers out there, because I feel like in my mind, I'm like, everybody else out there is like the other people in my critique group who were way better at writing than I am. And I'm that one that's embarrassed to be there like, oh, actually, I enjoy doing this. I thought this was something that I'm good at. But apparently it turns out I'm really bad at it. So in my mind, I'm like, that's still the case. Like, I'm still the worst writer out there, but I just still really like doing it, and I keep doing it. I'm not gonna stop. But I am trying to improve my writing skills. Anyways, that's embarrassing to admit. I hated my creative writing class and I was very bad at it. And then the fifth thing that I am embarrassed to admit, not only in the writing world, but just in general in life, I'm embarrassed to admit that I have not finished college. I did not get my degree. My cat is really trying to get my attention. He's like jumping at me and biting me. Boo! Stop it! I've really only taken a few semesters of college. I actually love school. I love school. Every time I think back on the semesters that I did do in college, I'm just like, oh, send me back to that time. I love being in school, and I love being a student, and I love learning, and I love doing assignments and turning them in and getting feedback from my professors. I love all of it so much. I do really want to go back and get my degree at some point. Right now is just not the time. So right now I'm working on my book, and I love to study, so I'm constantly studying other things, especially for my book. I study a lot of history and things like that. So I do a lot of self-study and learning online. There are so many courses you can take online for free that are just out there to help you learn. So I'm constantly learning in those ways. But for some reason is a source of embarrassment that I haven't finished college and gotten that diploma, that piece of paper that makes it official that I have learned stuff. Just learning on my own, for some reason I feel like is not as legit or something like that. So those are my 5 things that I am embarrassed to admit, but that I'm putting out there anyways, because I feel like we all have things that we're embarrassed to admit, or things that in the back of our minds we're like, oh, if anybody knew this, they would think I'm not a real writer, or they would stop watching my YouTube videos, or they would not want to read my book. Or I feel like we all have those things, and as embarrassing as they are to admit, I don't think there's anything wrong with them. I feel like that's just kind of what makes us human. And if you didn't have weaknesses, you would never be able to work on them and make them become strengths. So I have these things. I know all 5 of these things are areas that I feel like are my weaknesses, but that's okay because now I know that. I can pinpoint each one of those things and find ways to improve upon them. For example, with my typewriting, I'm starting to take typewriting classes online to learn how to do it the correct way. And if I had learned the correct way but was still a slow typewriter, maybe that's not something that I would try to improve upon. But I feel like that's something I can get really good at it, because it's something that I'm not good at now and I'm learning from scratch. And I feel like It's important not to just ignore the things that embarrass us about ourselves, or not to just ignore the things that we feel like are our weaknesses, because then they're never going to get better. I feel like it's better just to bring them to the forefront and be like, yeah, I struggle with this. So what? Now I know that I can work on it and get better at it. So as writers in the writing community, I feel like it's so important for us to constantly be trying to strengthen our craft and improve. And one of the first steps to doing this is just owning up to what your weak points are, I guess. I think that's all I have to say about that. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching me make a fool of myself, telling you all of my embarrassing weaknesses and things that I'm not so good about. But I hope it was fun for you guys to watch, and I hope that it inspires you to not hide from the things that you're embarrassed about, but to actually just embrace them and find ways that you can turn your weaknesses into strengths in your writing and just become the best writer that you can be. There are so many great resources out there nowadays. There are so many resources online, and there are so many great books out there that you can read. There's YouTube, where there are people not like me who are actually, who actually know what they're talking about. I love that we can just go to them and learn and apply those tips and tricks that they're teaching. That's what I'm striving to do, and I encourage you guys to do the same thing. What are your weaknesses? What are some things that you are embarrassed to admit about your own writing? If you feel comfortable sharing, please comment below so I feel like a little bit less of a fool. I think it would just be fun to hear what are some other things that you guys are like, oh, this is like my closet shame about my writing. I'm actually really bad at it, but I still like it, and so I do it anyway. That concludes this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please subscribe if you have not, and please give this video a little like just to let me know that it's okay that I'm embarrassed about these things. And stay tuned this week if you want to see some more shaming from me, some more self-shaming, because I have been tagged in the Reading My Own Cringeworthy Writing tag by Becca Rodriguez. Thanks, Rodriguez. You have no idea what you're in for. So if you guys want to see that, please subscribe so you'll know when it's up, and I will see you guys next time. Bye. Would you come take a walk with me? Cross over the mountains, we'll reach the pale blue sea. I love you, I'm so glad you love me too. And I wrote this song for you, every word